welcome to our new episode of AI Readiness for Salesforce. I'm extremely excited today to have with us Dan Collis from VRP. And I'll ask Dan to introduce himself in a second. What's the episode about? We'll see. But broadly speaking, you should expect something about AI, about readiness in all its aspects, or maybe some specific aspects, and a lot of perspective and thought leadership from one of the prominent people that operate in our ecosystem, Dan. So, Dan, would you care to introduce yourself? Welcome.
Sure thing. Hi, Luca. Dan Collis. I work at VRP Consulting as the head of pre-sales here. So I get the privilege of working with the sales team across a vast array of different potential projects, helping the sales team to scope and our projects, understand what the right product tool set are for those clients, and then scope and right size the projects to ensure they're deliverable. So it's quite a nice view across quite a high level across lots and lots of projects.
Exactly. I was thinking about the same thing, right? So you have a very privileged viewpoint into the ecosystem, both looking into clients and directly connecting with them and understanding their requirements, how they are looking into the future, looking into the present and their requirements, as well as, I guess, collaborating with Salesforce in a number of, probably all of these projects, and understanding a bit more about how they're taking their new shiny object to the market. So let's start with that, or maybe let's start broadly speaking from your privileged viewpoint. How are you seeing AI readiness panning out? How are clients ready? Is technology ready? Is your team ready? Are we ready?
Team readiness is probably one of the easier things to do. We're already in the technology space. The consultants are all ready to embrace Agentforce, and through all of Salesforce's training materials and trailheads, it's very easy to quickly upskill. So that's the area that we were able to approach very proactively. In terms of client readiness, it's been a long journey of people hearing about AI, trying to educate clients about AI, as well as our sales team who are less technically savvy, and getting them to appreciate that, what AI is, because it's such a broad term. And I think the real crux of that has really been able to show tangible examples of how AI and the tools that are powered by AI can actually help businesses on a real fundamental use case level, to bring it home to them, really.
What are those practical examples? Where do clients predominantly, I guess, start on their AI journey?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes helping them to realize that they might already be using AI in certain aspects of their lives where they perhaps weren't aware they were, and just really breaking that down to quite simple use cases, whether that be something helping them to draft up an email, to make an email look better. Maybe it's some of the ISV packages they use within Salesforce, who we know are all kind of enhancing their offering through AI that they might have been using without knowing it. And I think where we typically see certainly the generative AI and Agentforce having more use cases. I think they've got use cases everywhere, every industry, but the ones that are more prevalent are around the service side of any industry, that those call centers, and making sure that they can operate as efficiently as possible.
Which is an interesting, it's probably an obvious start point service, just because it's high volume. Sometimes it's probably low touch, right? So answering basic questions, and that's probably where most of the demos as well that we've seen from Salesforce typically focus on, in that area of the first touch point with a client, and answering some of their questions, or deflecting some of the more basic questions, and right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, right? Because a lot of technology has been around to support those use cases for years. You've got your live agents that are automated in some ways, and this step to Agentforce, it's just, you can quite easily just dismiss it as, oh, it's just another tool to help us with that. But where I really see the end customers being supported really well is, take a knowledge base, for example. I can type into a live chat, I've got a problem with this, and a bot can sort of reference some of that context and serve me up some knowledge to say, this is an article we've created that's going to answer your question. But as certainly the younger generations, but typically any technology savvy generation or end customer, is going to start getting to a point where we see, even, Google search, right? That's where we go for, well, certainly I go for everything. And I don't get served up websites anymore. I get served up an AI generated summary of everything that they've served up. So I'm not having to go and click through websites to understand the answer to my question anymore. I'm getting a curated answer to my very specific question. And I think that's where, certainly I've been having lots of conversations with clients saying, yes, we don't want to serve them up a knowledge article. We want them to be served up the answer to their question from that, or a multitude of different FAQ articles that maybe I've actually pulled from all of them and said, this is the best answer for you. And I think that's where, if companies aren't keeping up with that level of technology, that the user experience and the expectations of the end customers are really going to start to fall behind.
So that's probably just, well, let me put it as a question. Do you think these clients are looking into this as, let's sort this out for now, or as a start of a journey? Are they thinking big enough, do you think, in terms of what AI can do? Or are they skeptical? Are they a bit on the fence and maybe just, testing a few things? Or a combination of all of those?
Yeah, it completely depends on the customer themselves, how forward thinking they are, the teams they have available to them, because in a lot of cases through these industries, everyone's concentrating on BAU, keeping the ship moving, and maybe not having enough resource to really look and invest in the future technology, the tools that AI are making available to us now. But certainly those customers that I do speak to who are slightly more forward thinking, these are the things they're thinking about. They're really trying to think from a sort of a service design kind of point of view of, how do I want to interact with my end customers? How do my end customers want to interact with us as a business? And are we meeting that kind of top level of service that we'd expect to with our clients?
That makes sense. And from a readiness perspective, do they have where do they find the data to feed into that knowledge base? Do you feel like they are where they need to be? Are they working on it? That will be their first point of call to set this up.
I have a very specific kind of viewpoint on data readiness within AI. A lot of people will use that as a reason possibly not to start their foray into the AI space and utilizing the tools. And I don't think there's any need, if you've got bad data or not enough data, to not start at least dipping your toe in the water, understanding what's out there. A good example of this would be there's a tool within Agentforce, very simple one. I think simple use cases are often the best when we're talking about complicated technology like AI. Something called record summaries. So think about your data structure within your database. It might be a client. They might have a lot of orders. They might have some cases they've opened with a support desk. They might have some email correspondence that's been had with them, all stored in your CRM. And there's a tool within Agentforce just called record summaries. So you could make an agent, create a button that just talks to the agent, and whenever a salesperson clicks on that, or a service person clicks on that, it's going to summarize the record, and we'll tell it what it can go and get and what it should summarize from this data model. But instead of an end user going through all those records to understand when their last order was, whether they've got an open support ticket, anything like that, it would do all that for us, and it would give us a nice paragraph summary to say, this is the brief summary of the client before you go and see them. Or maybe that's done as and when they're calling into a service desk, so you've got that really pertinent information. Now, if as a company you have duplicates in the system, or you have you're not storing your emails against the customer record, that's separate from the system, is it going to be less useful? Yeah, it is. It's not going to generate as useful a response as if that data is in the system, but it's still going to do what your current human agents are doing much quicker than they would summarize that and give them that ready to answer the call. So there needs to be a roadmap for you. If you can see yourself improving the agent's efficiency or what it can do by bringing that data in there, absolutely build that in, but it doesn't stop you from using that now. You know, it's still relevant now. So I just think companies should try not to be paralyzed by a thought or a perception that their data is not ready, or there's too many duplicates in the system, or they haven't got enough knowledge articles. All AI or agents are trying to do is do what humans do, or the basic stuff that humans do, quicker, so that your human agents can do the value add stuff and have that data ready at their fingertips, and then just start to improve your data, and that will start to improve the efficiency and what your agents can do.
I think you're actually showing an example of an internal agent as an easier point of start, I guess, for someone embracing AI for the first time. You know, even if, and as you're saying, they don't fully trust the completeness of their data, but you know, you're not going to get better data if a human is looking through a number of, you know, accounts and opportunities and cases that are open or maybe closed or maybe empty or whatever. So
and same with external agents. If I was to ask a question of an agent and it's got a repository of knowledge to go and reference, your internal agents, your human agents, have still only got that internal repository to reference. Or if I'm searching through an FAQ repository, the data in there is not great. I'm still being served it up. I'm just having to filter through that incorrect data myself to get an incorrect answer instead of the agent serving me up the incorrect answer. So it's still speeding us up to get to the same endpoint, but ultimately, you need good data. You'd like that good data,
which has somehow a cultural aspect to it, because of the implication of AI, and there's a fear out there that it will replace humans. And what you're saying is the likelihood is that it will enhance the ability of a human to, in this case, read and understand and learn from data and information that is stored in the CRM to better serve and do their job, and focusing on the job at hand, which will be answering the question from a client or engaging with a client on the call. Do you see that as a theme in the out there?
I was actually at a conference last week talking to a public sector out in the US, a public sector team, and a councillor was speaking, and this was from Philadelphia, and he was saying how there is a reticence within public sector to replace jobs with AI, and as a technologist, my immediate kind of response, and certainly Salesforce's response, was, we're not looking to replace jobs, we're looking to enhance what your agents do. But I think it's not that simple. Ultimately, you can say, well, we're going to do all the basic stuff, and we're going to let the agent do that stuff, and then you're going to be elevated to do more of this stuff up here. And I think that's totally right. In some aspects it would do that, but I don't think that should mean that companies completely take their eye off the ball with that and say, come up with some policies to protect employees. I think it's really important that we protect our employees within a company, and actually make sure there are the correct amount of checks and balances put in place before projects are done. So yes, we want to adopt AI, and we want to make sure that it doesn't negatively impact our employees. Now, that won't be for everyone. There will be companies who are genuinely looking to reduce headcount by making things more efficient. But I think in a lot of industries, they're not looking to do that, and they're very conscious of that, especially those that are really heavily unionized. But just because a new technology's come out doesn't mean you shouldn't be looking at utilizing them to make yourselves more efficient. But at the same time, you can't just sort of say, this isn't going to impact our staff and it's not going to impact headcount, because it might do if you don't put those policies in place. I used an example last week of when the nail gun was invented. Did a bunch of building companies say, no, we're not using the nail gun because it means we won't need as many builders on each project? Well, no, they got them to use nail guns, but then they got to take on more projects. So they got to just do more work and be a better company. And if they didn't do that, the other company next door would be using nail guns and would be more efficient. So you've kind of got to try to embrace that technology. but you've also got to look out for your workers to make sure it's not either reducing headcount or pushing the level of the role above the qualification of the candidate, right? So not everyone is able to do that job, perhaps at a higher level. Not everyone. So you've got to invest in the training to make sure that they can do that job if you are fundamentally changing the profile of the job with AI.
Exactly. And I think that's the point where I think it kind of goes full circle. You started by saying that you feel like your organization is ready to embrace this new technology wave. And the way you characterize that is by saying we are all trained up and certified, and we have a number of training streams that we run through our team in order to elevate them. So, you're right in saying, that element of training is fundamental, both to reassure, I guess, the organization, because by learning, they understand what can and cannot be done and what will and will not be done by AI and through AI. And at the same time, they learn to cope with it and to make the most of it. And so they elevate their, as you said, their ability to contribute to the overall business or services or, whatever mission, if it's not a for-profit. Very interesting perspective. We talked about what works and what will work and what we've seen working. What's not working? What are the blockers that you've seen? We talked about a couple of doubts in data, which you solved by saying, let's not make that a blocker. What else have you seen as people on the fence are not really ready to embrace AI?
Another one where I kind of want to sort of play it down a little bit, because it's no different from any other technology that we have out there in Salesforce. So there are companies that have really extensive IT functions with lots of Salesforce admins, developers, that they could take on this technology, design things, come up with their own agents, manage those, make sure they continue to be efficient. And that's great if you can do that. But it's only like when I go into another client, I'm always designing solutions for that client, not because it's the right, necessarily the best thing to do on Salesforce. The best thing to do on Salesforce might be build a whole Lamborghini. It's going to be brilliant. It's going to be great. But if they can't take that forward and maintain that solution, it's the wrong solution for them. Maybe they need something that's more out of the box and something that's not as hard to configure or not as hard to maintain. So you don't want to leave a company with technical debt that they can't support. And I think with AI, it's just the same. We look at agents. You've got to build an agent. Everything Salesforce gives you is fantastic, right? It's a framework for you to quickly deliver agents, but they've still got to be monitored. They've still got to be maintained. You've got to make sure they're efficient. Now, not every company will be able to do that, but I think the way that I try to talk to clients is the same way I talk to them about any solution and using any part of the technology of the Salesforce platform is, well, maybe instead of using this that we're going to build for you and you have to maintain, look at other things. Look to the App Exchange for tools that are built for your use case, because there will be every App Exchange partner we work with has either already released. Most of them are very ahead of the game. Vinton, whether it's whatever the ISV, most of them have already been launching something on Agentforce, and they were usually ahead of the game, getting early access to Agentforce before it was even released, to make sure that their app was market leading. So lean on those technologies, the pre-built technologies that have already thought about the use cases, have tried to put it to market. And yes, you pay a license fee for those, but you don't pay for the implementation, or you're not building it yourself. You haven't got that technical debt. So it doesn't have to be Agentforce that you built and come up with a use case and made specific to your use case. It can be an ISV, by which I mean a managed package that you buy off the App Exchange and install in your system that's ready to go, and the responsibility of that managed package to maintain.
Exactly. It's a matter of, as you were alluding to, is resources and investment, right? So that let not be the blocker now or the blocker in the future that will prevent you to fully, bring along whatever innovation you're building today. Talking about resources and investment, we touched upon it just before starting our episode. Pricing. So talking about investment, right? So pricing has been a blocker, at least, I guess, if not for anything else, for the shift, the mindset shift that it requires in an industry that is used to buying and thinking in terms of licenses. And Salesforce would, had to, I believe, introduce a new approach to its pricing. It presented it, and something wasn't quite right, or at least that's my perception. You've been closer to that. What's the lay of the land? What's happening and what's changing? And I think World Tour is coming up, so there's a couple of announcements there, right?
Really, really interesting around pricing of agents AI. Einstein, as it's all been called in the last sort of 12 months. I think we're now talking about Agentforce and agents and how they're priced up, and they've changed their pricing model, and I think it was absolutely needed. Previous to this, there was kind of like published list prices of per conversation was $2, but then what was a conversation, and then what kind of could underlie that, and then trying to model out conversations across a proof of concept, because ultimately when it comes to volume pricing, the hardest thing is the client estimating what their volumes are going to be that's going to be realistic, because this is all new technology. They probably don't have something in place that's like for like. They might have a chatbot that they're using to then feed into live agents, but they probably don't have something that is AI. And now with adoption of AI becoming more prevalent, is that going to like multiply by 10? They get 10 times the number of customers coming through this channel instead of calling up their call center, and then they've got to sort of factor in those costs, and that's quite difficult for them to do. But with this change, for me, I think it's made it much more scalable and much more simple. So they've changed to something called flex credits. You buy bundles of flex credits, and then from my initial understanding of it, whenever the agent takes an action, you're charged some of your flex credits. Each flex credit is cheaper than a conversation. So if you have a simple conversation that only actually interacts with the agent, then that's once, or the agent only has to perform one action, then that's loads cheaper. If you have a conversation where the agent goes back and forth to the database and has to do 100 actions, sure, that conversation is more expensive. But I think just saying that it was scalable before because it was per conversation wasn't really true. It was ended up being very expensive for companies who wanted to have lots of conversations but had relatively simple use cases of Agentforce through those conversations. Now it really looks at the simplicity of the conversation you're having, and we've actually been able to have much more constructive conversations since that announcement only last week around costing, around scalability, because actually we can say now, well, we know your use case. We can map out a typical conversation of what we'd like to do with that agent and that use case. And we know that's only going to use up, 60 credits, which is less than $2 in terms of a cost for that conversation. So it's definitely more scalable. And I think that's all anyone wants, right? Is the ability to accurately estimate what something's going to cost and feel like they're getting value for money for the thing they're doing. So if you're doing a simple conversation, let's get charged a simple amount. And when we say the actions, there's something called standard actions and something called complex actions within Salesforce. Standard actions come out of the box. If you modify those actions at all, then they're complex or custom actions. They come with a slightly higher price tag. But I think, again, it really simplifies things and makes it a lot more scalable for clients.
That absolutely makes sense. It's fascinating how quickly Salesforce is capable of, once again, I guess, reacting to feedback and in fast-moving technology, where they're also they're equally, I guess, capable of reverting the course in other areas like pricing, which it was perceived as a blocker. It will be interesting, as you said, the first signals from your conversations are good with clients. They understand, and they are, kind of, it ticks the boxes of the predictability, as you were saying. So,
and I think it's made it easier for Salesforce as well, right? They've got to sell it, and if they're struggling, their salespeople are struggling either to get their heads around the pricing model, understanding whether there's a call through data cloud to the RAG and then trying to price that in, and then there's some multipliers on it. If they're struggling to price something up to be able to sell it, then something's wrong, right? And they're the salespeople. If they're constantly having to leverage all their technical experts to even just come up with a pricing model, come up with a price for a client, something's not going to work there, because it's not going to be scalable. They can't just go out and start selling this hand over fist. So they need something they can talk to clients about value, and they need to be able to price it up on their own. And I think this new model will really help them to be able to talk to clients, price things up, and give sensible numbers to clients.
So another couple of things that I heard introduced with the new pricing. One is about the ability to switch between existing license costs and subscription into real human licenses, and leave those behind. If you're not hiring, or if you're not using all your licenses, you can use that money to buy Agentforce credit. And I think there's a bit of marketing play in there. Maybe they're kind of suggesting that there will be that ROI will not be only on the quality of the service, the speed at which you can deliver, the enhanced level at which your people will operate, but also nudging to the fact that you're likely going to need fewer people, and that's also will realize some of the savings that you should expect to do. And the other area is, as I understand it, is the internal agents will be unlimited, or they will have an extremely cheaper pricing, as in you'll be able to use your credits much more efficient way internally as well. Like that use case that we mentioned earlier with an out of the box action of summarizing an account or summarizing a record, that's an internal agent role, and that will be, I believe, unlimited or near unlimited for all clients that embrace Agentforce, which is also very interesting move to push the Agentforce out of the door inside the org, and kind of enabling it to make the difference as much as possible. Thinking about ROI, scalability, we're kind of looking into the future. What's a possible prediction? Like if we're here in a year time having this conversation, and we look back at what happened, and from the impact of this pricing approach to first experimentation into a bit more mainstream adoption, what will our conversation be about, do you think?
I don't know if it's a year's time or more, but fundamentally, I think, maybe things are moving so quickly. Who knows?
6 months. Maybe just
Well, I think what you're going to start to see, and it sort of leans into that ISV conversation, but I think from Salesforce, what they're going to be doing, because they want more people to be able to adopt this. If they want more people to adopt it, they've got to see the value. If they're going to see the value, they need to know the use cases. So they've already got a whole bunch of standard agents out of the box, whether it be a sales agent, service agent, and the industry clouds. I mean, the great thing about industry clouds is they're so specific to an industry, they can just come up with as many use cases they like. So you'll see a lot more out of the box shipped agents that you'll just be able to plug and play and then tweak. Ultimately, the hard thing about agents is the prompt. Is writing the prompt in a way that it does exactly what you want it to do, sticking those guardrails in place to make sure it's not doing things you don't want it to do. We can't go amiss of talk about Agentforce if we don't talk about the trust layer. So there's plenty of security wrapping up Agentforce, but we can still put in bad prompts that just do things that we don't really want it to. It might talk in a way we don't want it to, or that doesn't reflect the business. So those prompts are really important to get those right. So if they can give us a really good prompt to guide the agent to do what we want, and then all we're doing is tweaking it to our business needs, or to have our business's voice that we want to portray to the end user, then that's much easier. Really quick setup. We can start to leverage some of those out the box agents. And I think probably what we'll see with every release for the next a lot of years is just numbers and numbers of these out of the box agents coming. I'm sure that will be announced at Dreamforce later in the year.
That's an interesting. So it's going to be a force of agents, kind of the ultimate idea, right? So it's a little army, and you go and pick and choose the one that, or even have, I can imagine a meta layer of an agent that picks the right agent, so understands what the request and what the best course of action is, and then picks the agent that is designed to pursue that particular course of action. which is
yeah, and that really helps keep things in the guardrails. So your job is to pick the right agent, and then that agent is defined in what it should do. And I mean, it's a bit similar to how we worked as humans, right? Your call center would have managers that might route the calls before we did call routing and had skills set up to route those calls. Same sort of thing. Yeah, I can definitely see agents managing agents, which starts to feel a bit sci-fi, but we'll try to stay away that. I think a really interesting future kind of concept or kind of thing to think about is, what does it mean in terms of interacting with systems in general? You know, what does it mean in terms of actually inputting data into CRM systems? I'm thinking internal users a little bit, but let's talk about customers as well. You know, at what point do we start to move away from the standard interface of how we interact with our screen, typing in things to Google, typing in things to Excel spreadsheets or to CRM systems, and going record by record to go and understand? At what point does it start to become a little bit more abstract than that, and I'm just telling the system what I want it to know, and it's telling me back? Because ultimately that's all we have, right? We put data in, and it probably wants to generate us an output of either a recommendation or some sort of analytics out the back of it. Normally we put data in, we want to know what that data is in a summarized format. At what point does that stop being manual input into fields, manual input into systems, and it's more us articulating to an AI agent what is it we want to tell them? I've made a sale to this client, thanks for the update. And then, you know, manager at the other end, tell me what updates I've had from all my sales reps. Okay, no problem, I can do that. But then you can start to get into the idea of, well, what does that mean in terms of structuring data, storing data? Typical kind of data architecture that we think about historically that's logical, does it start to move away from that and become more what's logical for an AI agent or an AI tool to reference? And that's where I think it's all start to really fundamentally change how we interact with computers and tools.
True. I think the optimization is not for the database as a human designed it, but it's more the optimizing for an AI agent or, you know, army of agents to read into it and maximize access to the information that is needed, and then speed of relaying that information back. Very interesting. Very interesting perspective. Anything else? Any last parting tips for anyone approaching Agentforce, knocking on the door of VRP and saying, guys, I have this amazing need and I believe you can help, or anything else?
Yeah, I think one, start small. Don't try to take a massive chunk of AI and start to implement it. Start small, start to see what small use cases are, and don't focus on the tool. Don't focus on Agentforce. Don't focus on AI at all. Saying I want to adopt AI is going to be a hiding to nothing for any customer. Saying I have a problem I want to solve, and then engaging with partners like VRP that can then guide you to the tool that can actually achieve what you want. So what's the pain point? What's the use case? What's the user trying to do? The answer to that might be, we can do that in Agentforce, and that is going to give a better output to the end user. It might be that that's not the answer, and you can use more traditional tools like flows or reporting, or so don't start from an idea that Agentforce or AI is the route forward. Always start with a business case, and then you'll have a much more constructive conversation about how the various tools available to you can actually help you to achieve your goals.
That makes total sense. Thank you very much, Dan. It was a very bullish, I think, view into AI readiness and into the future of our ecosystem as it gets ready to embrace AI. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure the people that are listening to this also have. And well, thank you very much.
Well, love talking about it, and also hearing all the other opinions that are out there. So I'm tuning into the whole series. So appreciate it.
Super. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Oka. Bye.
Bye-bye.